Helen, to you first. As the conversation progressed as you thought it might, what stood out for you from the last half an hour or so in conversation?
So, in many ways, I agree with a lot of the, really important points that were made. And I think Divya had some good points about, kind of the future and the potential for human concerns and backlash and how it may not be smooth sailing. So my own personal view, it's a little bit like being in a pot of water where the temperature is going up a little bit at a time. And, there will be some gradual transition, similar to kind of the advent of air travel. So once upon a time, we had the horse and buggy, and then we had the automobile, and then we had rail, and then we had, aviation take flight. So I think there are some lessons there, and I'm, enthralled by the future that both Divya and David have been painting. So thank you for sharing.
Wonderful. I too have been spellbound by this. Andy, what stood out for you in the last conversation?
Oh, so much. I love listening to writers speak about their work. I am married to a writer, and it's just so fascinating the impact that storytelling has on the consciousness, the knowledge, and the emotional gravity that people have towards these ideas, and it's extraordinarily impactful. I think that what stood out to me is a lot of the adoption piece and how will this be adopted that Helen was talking about there. I also was thinking about a lot of these pieces that are somewhat contradicting. I'm thinking about how there's the AI world, and the world in general is pretty good at punitive work, not so good at restorative work. And so is there a world in which AI can help with the restoration of what the chat was talking about as well, around like what governments need to do in order to change? And then a lot of that is by lobbyists and by companies and by individual people. And can there be more restoration there? I think about scarcity and abundance. I think that there is that the humans have been trained and been applauded by thinking in a scarcity way, because then we can get more and disregard others. So what happens when there is abundance? Well, we are in a place of abundance already, and it could become even more abundant. How do we adapt to that as humans? And I also think in the climate space around that David brought up around adaptation and mitigation, we're doing a good amount in the in trying to figure out how to lower more carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. But what about the ones that we've already? What about the work that we've already put out there, and what are we doing to reduce that? And I think that's where a lot more funding we'll see over the next couple of decades move into that. And the markets will start shifting in that way. I think carbon offset markets are going to be a big driver of GDP broadly, GDP being an underdefined word in term generally. But I think that those will be really interesting things to keep an eye on that these folks have really hit on. And then the last thing that I'll say is these two words that I've been thinking about for the past few years, which is apocalypse, and I already talked about compassion, but apocalypse, I think we're in, and we will continue to be in, less so in kind of the biblical sense of end of the world, but more in the original Greek meaning, which is the uncovering of truth. And I think we are at a point now where we can really start uncovering truth that has been hidden behind things of just not having access to data and information, but also truth that has been purposefully covered up by people and by histories and by stories. And now there's new stories coming out that are uncovering truth in ways that humans broadly haven't known about. And so what are we doing with those stories? What are we doing with those data? What are we doing with those facts? And how can we prevent those things from being mowed over and hidden again from our future generations?
Yeah, such wise words. Andy, thank you for contributing those and for adding your own reflections on tonight. Tanya, your reflections of the conversation between David and Divya?
Yeah, I thought it was very invigorating. Thank you, Divya. I learned a lot more about bioengineering than I knew before that conversation. I liked actually something that David touched upon we absolutely need to talk about more, which is exploring, the universe. And that's because it brings into question a more philosophical aspect of this whole conversation, which is, what does it mean to be human? Does life exist outside, Fermi's paradox, does life exist outside of this, our universe? What is consciousness? Where is it rooted? And one of the things that excites me most about the development of AI is that it'll allow us to go beyond, explore, right? So if we ensure the safety and validity of our systems, we can send them into space, and that's a good thing. So we learn more about humanity. And B, I think it brings into question the very nature, some very neuroscientific questions, right? Which is, how does intelligence emerge? And as a result, how does consciousness emerge? And these are questions that pervade us quite regularly, right? And I think they're in the back of some people's minds, but at the school level, we don't really cultivate existential thinking, but we should, because I think it has a huge impact on how we approach day-to-day lives, our day-to-day lives, how we approach problem solving, and also about how we think about things like caring for our planet or sustainability, and coming to the whole unity of it all. So I thought that was super fascinating, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I'm super excited by the idea of the multiverse.
It's a big universe out there, but unfortunately it's expanding, which means that we're almost certainly never going to leave our galaxy, or at best our local cluster of galaxies. We are probably it in terms of meaning making in our near cluster. So I do hope we preserve this for at least a bit longer. I would love to get a question from everybody else who's here tonight. I see lots of cameras on. I'd love to see a hand raised and perhaps a question being called out, or even better, pop you on the screen here with the spotlight. There's been a lot of chat. There's been a lot of questions in there. Is there somebody who would like to contribute a question or put something to this group and others? Let's give it a quick second to think.
I think Mohammed had some questions. Karen and Aziz had some questions.
Yeah, well, Oliver's just put his hand up, which is wonderful. It's always good to be brave. What do you want to say, Oliver?
Okay, I want to raise a. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to raise a toast to artificial intelligence. I didn't have enough time to open the bottle. On successfully reaching retirement age, because artificial intelligence turned 65 years old at the end of August 2021. It has the term, and the research program name has been coined artificial intelligence in 1956. And one thing I wanted to bring up, I tried to share this image in the chat, but it was somehow not successful. Can I share something here? There's a picture.
Yeah, you want to share your screen for a second? Let me try that, Oliver.
Yeah, I think it's very instructive. Fenster, Bildschirm. Okay, now you probably see yourself. But can you see this?
We see it.
Yeah, the number of years from now until the predicted arrival of human-level artificial intelligence. So this is, they did a survey amongst artificial intelligence researchers.
We're not seeing that. We're seeing a lovely picture of a mosaic.
All right, so then that didn't work. Okay, then that didn't work. Then I would give up on that. So there was a survey done on how long until we have human-level artificial intelligence, right? And there is a very broad distribution on in 5 years, in 10 years, and this is over the 65 years of existence of artificial intelligence. They asked the researchers, when do we have strong AI, the kind of AI where robots run around on the streets, the kind of visions we heard today? And the typical answer was 20 years. The typical answer is in 20 years we will have it. Why? Because that's the age when the AI researcher thinks I'm in retirement and I really want to have this, to reach this goal by then, right? So it's very fitting that today we speculate again on what will the world look like if, again, we assume in 20 years from now, we will have human level AI. So I would think, please don't trust those predictions too much in terms of how strong the AI will be. But I would think what will happen is AI, of course, as a technology will grow, but, and this is in a response to Helen. I think, Helen, it's better not to think about how robots can interact with humans, but how artificial intelligence can interact with humans, because there's a big difference there. Robots, the idea of robots is that the AI is somehow encapsulated into the robot. The robot has this hard shell interface, and we don't really see how the AI is working inside the robot. And I would think there are two possible developments for us as humans. One is that the AI, that we submit control voluntarily, more or less, to AI, and then we become de-skilled masses. And the other scenario is that we know what the AI knows, what the AI doesn't know, and we don't just have, who said that? I'm not sure. Somebody said we should have a robot. I think Divya was that, right? That we should have very skilled robots as teachers, maybe, or our children might have that in 20 years. I think we should all have robot teachers, or all have AI teachers, actually, meaning that the AI doesn't just help us and de-skill us, but the AI encourages us to learn, to grow also. So I think there are two possible futures for the next 20 years. And I have a preferred one. My preferred one is that we'll have human growth along with artificial intelligence growth. And it's not just helping us, but it's also encouraging us to develop ourselves. So long comment, sorry about that.
No need to apologize at all. Thank you for lending your voice to the conversation. Enjoy that bottle of wine. Vipad, with you.
Thank you. I actually was just, because of this has been a fantastic event and brilliant conversations, I was just trying to think what would be the predictions for 2041 generally. Instead of a question, I just wanted to put in 5 points based on the conversations and discussions that we had. One, I think that we would, and I'd be grateful if people would sort of think on that. I think there are 5 things. We may not be near artificial general intelligence. That's a different ballgame altogether. We will be very much in artificial narrow intelligence. I think there will be a data infrastructure in the sense that there will be clarity around how to use data in a sensible manner when you're building AI systems through regulations or laws or whatever be the situation. 3, I think there would be regulation of impact of AI. There would be identification probably of what AI applications are good to be used and what may not be a good idea to use, and this is in line with how it's there in the EU regulations currently. And probably, these are the 3-4 areas that I think we can expect in 2041, at least in terms of moving forward. Because there's a lot of discussion about how you would regulate AI. 2041, you would expect that you would, and you also have clarity about, the final point was, you would also have clarity about which countries are actually in development of AI and which countries are not. So rather than 2041 being AI being all over the globe, it'll be clarity in terms of which countries are influencing developments elsewhere. Just a couple of thoughts, not really questions, but things that I thought would probably make sense if you're thinking ahead in time.
Thank you so much for your contributions. We're 9 minutes to the hour, so we're certainly closing down. So I'll move our thinking to more sort of last thoughts, final words. I wonder if I can ask the panel that's joined us today. I mean, what kind of takeaways do you want? We had 140 odd people come onto this call. They're going to have 140 odd conversations this week. What do we want to put out there? What ripples do we want going out to form bigger imprints in the world? Helen, with you again, perhaps. I mean, what are the takeaways that you're hearing tonight? What are the things that we can use to create this better future?
So I think that we face some dilemmas. And I think it's important to think for a minute about some of those dilemmas and some of the stakeholders. So I think in terms of four. Okay, there's the implications are much broader, but from a user dilemma perspective, can and should we trust AI and autonomous systems? So I think that is a very central question that people will wrestle with, whether it doesn't matter if they have zero knowledge of AI and autonomous systems or they're world experts. That is still something that we need to carefully think about. The second is the dilemma of the technologist. How can technologists develop AI and autonomous systems which humans will be willing and able to trust? So I think that's a fascinating question that we need to consider deeply. Then I think there's also the regulator's dilemma. So I think of regulators as guardians of the public good. We started to touch on that in one of the earlier kind of give and takes back and forth, but how do regulators ensure that AI and autonomous systems are trustworthy? And I think trust is really one of the most important things. And if the systems are trustworthy, minimizing the potential for harm and enabling human well-being, which starts to get at what Andy was trying to talk about with making the world a better place and kind of the whole AI for good concept. And last but not least is the machine's dilemma. Okay, so this is starting to get to how can intelligent and increasingly autonomous machines earn the trust of humans and make better informed decisions and execute the best of alternative actions? So I think that there's going to be value as we look 20 years in the future of thinking not just from the vantage point of a human-centric view of the world, but also being diverse and inclusive and thinking about machines as stakeholders as part of this whole dialogue going forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much. David, with you for final thoughts.
Well, I want to point to the possibility we might not even get to 20 years in the future. We've talked about, well, interesting things will happen 20 years in the future because that's sort of later in our lives, isn't it? But actually, AI is changing rapidly all the time. And one way it's changing is in its ability to control weapons systems. It can monitor what drones are doing. It can recognize potential targets, and it can say, hey, this is a really bad guy who's about to do some terrible thing. We need to take him out immediately, don't we? And currently, most militaries in the world say drones can't make these kind of decisions. You need to waken up a responsible human and keep them in the loop. But we have these hypersonic missiles. Missiles such are coming much faster than ever before. If we wait for a slow-moving human brain to make a decision, it's too late. So there is more of a risk that we will put AI in control of at least some of our missiles. And AI, like all software, occasionally has bugs. If you've seen the film Dr. Strangelove, you'll know what I mean. If you haven't seen it, you should look it up. It is an incredible film, prescient. So this is not just an idle chat about what might happen over the next 20 years, and we've got plenty of time to get it right. If we get it wrong, we may not live that long at all. We might blunder into the same kind of thing that terrified my colleagues and I when I was a student in the 1980s, which was that there was a looming accidental nuclear war. That threat hasn't gone away, and it might come back, especially with the belligerent aspects of many aspects of today's lives. So let's get on top of these issues even more urgently, rather than just thinking, well, 20 years out, we're going to have issues. The time to start thinking about these issues is today.
I watched Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove just the other day, David, a couple of weeks ago, enjoyed it immensely, recommend it. Andy, you were nodding a few times. I wonder if you were nodding to Helen's thoughts on trust. Final word from you?
Sure, I'll try to be quick about this. I so appreciate everybody on this panel and the questions coming through the chat. It's been really intriguing and exciting. And you know, we're, to David's point about war, we're at a point also where we're not even worried about missiles. We're worried about like tiny little bee-shaped things that can track people's faces and can kill them immediately like that. So it'll be a fascinating thing moving forward. I think a lot about complicated versus complex. We talked about this a little bit with Richard and how we live in a complex world. And because we live in a complex world, I think a lot about the natural world that has been able to adapt to the complexities of the world. And particularly, I think a lot about Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Emergent Strategy. And she talks in this book about mycelium, the underground fungi that connect different ecosystems. And I think that's part of everybody's job here on the panel and in the chat, is drawing best practices, drawing movements of equality and your own knowledge and creativity and humanness from one aspect to another, to the various communities that we all and individuals that we interact with. That's how change is hopefully going to occur. That's hopefully how we're going to get to those more optimistic futures that we have, and not end the world on ourselves in the next 20 years.
Thank you, Andy. Tanya, a final word from you, if you may.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Andy just said. Generally speaking, I think it's, we absolutely need, we need to push the conversation forward. So these sort of platforms are really important, but the hope is that they inspire people to actually do. And when it comes to things like autonomous weapons and things like that, the only solution that any of us really have at this level is, things like lobbying or bringing awareness to it. So I don't think we certainly shouldn't undermine the power of doing that. Grassroots movements, even, you may feel like you're just a small player in the grand scheme of things, and you may be, but that doesn't mean that you can't incite a little bit of change. So, even if you're at the bottom of the anthill. So I think that's super important. We just need to be more proactive when it comes to policies, and we'll be on a better track.
Thank you so much. You're right. It all makes a difference for sure. And you don't know how big an impact things will be. It's impossible to know. Divya, the last word goes to you.
Thanks. That's a big responsibility.
Just a little.
The thing I'm getting from this whole panel and from hearing from everyone and my own thoughts are AI has the ability to empower and to educate, not on it by itself, but through our efforts. And that's really our mandate and our responsibility, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a speaker, is to think about how is the technology that you are advocating for or that you are developing in the lab or in your company going to empower people to move into a better future. All the individuals, not just the people in your particular sphere of life, but globally. And how will you educate your friends and your family and your connections to help them understand how to use this technology in a way that is good and is empowering?
Thank you so much. We've hit the 2-hour point. There's obviously so much more that we could talk about. I think we're going to have to take this conversation forward in November. I think we're going to have to maybe talk about what will it take to trust AI. So perhaps some of you might like to come back and join us for that conversation. I will say a great deal of thanks to our contributors first, to Andy, to Helen, to Tanya, to David, to Divya. Your time tonight is extremely generous, but not only that, you've spent considerable time, many of you, planning this as well, both with us and thinking ahead. And we don't take that for granted at all. We are hugely grateful that you would do that and value all of your time immensely. To Vibhab, who's been contributing today on the live and also here and guides this community so well. And to Karen, Alex, Hazel, and Odelia as well, who are a little bit more behind the scenes today, but are absolutely priceless to the work that we do and making these things happen. And finally, to Jazel, who really directed this event, really worked on the narratives and with the speakers, and of course was here moderating today. I want to publicly thank you, Jazel, for the work you've done leading up to this. Really appreciate you so much. And to everybody else along the journey today, thank you for being here. We've missed it by 2 minutes, but not too bad. And we're going to stick around. I'll hopefully mute my mic for a bit, listen to what everybody else has to say, but we'll close officially here. As always, much love. Thank you so much for being here.